Welcome to our HAC, and HAC stands for the Housing Action Coalition. The HAC series is a monthly discussion-based, action-focused event that is hosted by Silicon Valley at Home, or SV at Home, which we typically have on the fourth Friday of every month. We're having this time webinar style due to the large number of people signed up. And we hope that you can join us in the Q&A function. If you click on the bottom of your screen, we also have the chat available, although we do ask that your questions be submitted in the Q&A function so that we can track it all. But feel free to share your thoughts in the chat, but we ask that you do keep it respectful. We're gonna go to our ground rules. And so we want to ensure that the conversations and relationships here today remain respectful and productive. And we want you to be kind and courteous to each other. We will not tolerate rude comments or personal attacks. We do encourage asking questions. Once again, please use the Q&A function in the bottom of your screen, and listening as we learn and engage with each other. Please keep comments and questions focused on COPA, our topic today. And sometimes chat can get a little lively. If we find that is distracting for you from the content of the discussion, we will encourage you to consider closing the chat temporarily. And if it does get too out of hand, we will shut off the chat. So we will, I would love to introduce our Executive Director of SV at Home, Regina Celestin-Williams, who will be moderating our panel today. Thank you so much. Take it away, Ms. Regina.
Thank you, Emily. So happy to be here today with you all, talking about the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act as we consider how to move this policy forward in the city of San Jose. I have to tell you that, for me, the Community Opportunity Purchase Act is really about using a preservation tool to create staying power for our residents and our community members. And so I'm excited to learn from our panelists about how we can further empower community members, residents, tenants to continue to have, success and investment in our community, and to be able to thrive in the Silicon Valley. So I'm excited to learn more about that. I've actually experienced firsthand how wonderful it is to work with residents on empowerment and how they can purchase their rental buildings and have ownership and have stability and have a say in whether or not they can continue to afford to live in a place they've called home for a very long time. In my experience of working under the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act in Washington, D.C. And so I think that this is a real tool that can help us make this particular community, Silicon Valley, more viable for more of our neighbors, more of our community members. And so people can afford to live here and continue to be a part of our community. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump to our panelists. I'm so excited to hear from them today. First, we have Asen Ndi, who's here with us. He was a partner. He was a grant fellow under the Partnership for the Bay's Future Challenge, working with the city of San Jose and SOMOS Mayfair to address displacement through tenant preference policy, a preservation strategy, and alternative models for homeownership. Asen had joined the city of San Jose during his fellowship tenure, previously working for Working Partnership USA. And then previous to that, he was a strategic researcher for SEIU Local 1. So significant experience in planning and organizing campaigns. And we're excited to just learn a little bit more from Asen about the work that he did under the Partnership for the Bay's Future. So with that, Asen, please let us know a little bit more about the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act.
Sure. I think Emily, if you can help me with slides. Just want to say hi, everybody, and thank you so much for joining and spending your lunch hour with us. For folks who are not so new to COPA here in San Jose, you've probably heard me talk about this a few times over the last year. But what I really want to focus on is really kind of how we got here and what is the story of why we're bringing COPA to San Jose. Next slide. So basically the history of COPA in San Jose really starts in the mid-2010s. The city had experienced a lot of dramatic rent increases. And there were a few events that happened in 2016 and 2017 that really brought to fore the need for housing preservation in the city. One was a very well-publicized story of a 90-plus-year-old World War II veteran who was evicted in order for his landlord to be able to take advantage of a different housing program. Another big event around that time was the announcement that the Reserve, a 200-unit apartment complex on the west side of San Jose, was purchased and would soon be demolished, and residents would need to leave. It was also right around the heels of the announcement that Google would be moving to downtown San Jose in the Diridon Station area and potentially bringing up to 20,000 directly employed folks, as well as 8,000 potentially supportive employees to downtown San Jose in an area that was already experiencing a lot of gentrification and a lot of displacement. And so within that context, the city started looking at what are some ways that the city could really try to address, these sorts of pressures that were really happening and really coming to bear here in San Jose. What we saw or what we heard from community members is that one of the things that was kind of missing, I think, in the city was a way for folks who already lived in what sometimes is called NOAA, or naturally occurring affordable housing, will be able to remain in those places if the properties went up for sale. And so as part of sort of the efforts of the city to try to address displacement, the city was part of a 10-city cohort, national cohort that was run by PolicyLink called the Anti-Displacement Policy Network that started in 2018. It included a lot of different cities that were also experiencing these kinds of pressures, like Seattle and Denver and Minneapolis and Boston. And we ended up learning a lot about what are some different strategies that you could bring to bear to be able to interrupt the process of displacement. What we also learned from this process was that obviously there were some different things that the city already had in place. We were, I think, pretty far ahead of other locations as far as housing protection or tenant protections were concerned. We also had a pretty significant investment in affordable housing production, but really where we're missing policies was in housing preservation. And so as part of the process, we ended up with 100 long list of policies that we needed to whittle down to come up with something that could be implemented. And so as part of that, we worked with SOMOS Mayfair, working partnerships in my previous role, to put together a report that tried to look at the different ways that we could address displacement. As part of that report, there was an opportunity to purchase recommendation from that community report, which then ended up becoming part of the Citywide Anti-displacement Strategy that was adopted at City Council in September 2020. And sorry about the typo there. That was in September 2020. As part of council direction to look into or explore the community opportunity to purchase, this policy was actually prioritized by council. They told us that this is something that we want to rank at the top of the things that we need to work on. And so we really started focusing on the community opportunity to purchase, along with a couple of other policies that would support tenant protection and housing preservation. At the same time, again, a lot of this is all happening at the same time. In early 2020, the city was selected to be part of a regional effort called the Partnership for the Bay's Future that would embed a fellow, that was me, in the housing department to work on a specific set of policies over 2 years. And so that cohort included cities like East Palo Alto and Berkeley and Redwood City and Oakland that were also looking at ways to help, again, disrupt this process of displacement and to really, really try to move forward policies that would help stop the housing crisis. Next slide. And so as part of this process, we really went pretty deep into researching and talking to communities where there were already opportunity to purchase programs in place. You see the two cities that are bolded here are the cities that already have opportunity to purchase programs. The policy in DC, which is called a Tenant Opportunity to Purchase, or a TOPA, has had an opportunity to purchase program in place since the early 1980s. So it's been about 40 years. The program was very little used for almost most of its history, but it really didn't start really kicking into gear until the early 2010s, when the district decided to invest some pretty significant amount of resources towards purchasing properties. In San Francisco, a COPA policy was adopted in 2019. That policy, is still getting it's still building up, and obviously it was somewhat impacted by the global pandemic. But I've heard, at least from the staff in San Francisco and from some of the qualified nonprofits up there, that there have some plans to really increase the capacity for the COPA program in San Francisco. There are also opportunity to purchase programs under consideration in East Palo Alto, in Oakland, and Berkeley. They were all part of the same cohort. Berkeley and East Palo Alto actually have votes coming up either next month or the month after that. And then Oakland is looking at summer potentially for a vote. Minneapolis is also considering an opportunity to purchase program and has been referred to their council. Next slide. Yeah. And I will pass it.
Thank you, Asen. That was wonderful. Very helpful background. So next up, I'll be introducing Kristen Clements. Kristen actually has quite an extensive background, 25 years in affordable housing and community development, as well as 17 years with the City of San Jose in its housing department, working both in the policy area and production of affordable homes. I've actually known Kristen since I first arrived in San Jose 7 years ago, working to build more affordable housing. And I'm sure several folks know her because she's been involved in creating 5,000 affordable apartments, overseeing 390 million in loan originations, and a portfolio of 19,000 affordable homes. So, it's very challenging not to have worked with Kristen in this field if you've been working on affordable housing in the city of San Jose. But her background is extensive, with work at the Federal Home Loan Bank of San Francisco, and also at Bank of America and lending. She serves as a planning commissioner at the city of San Carlos, and is on the public policy committee for the Housing Leadership Council of San Mateo. Extensive hours, not only working in this field, but volunteering in this field. So excited to hear a little bit more from Kristen on what the city is doing around the Community Opportunity to Purchase Act. So welcome, Kristen. So glad to be with you today.
Thank you, Regina. And Regina is one of my favorite borrowers a few years ago, and I feel like you've been here longer than 7 years. That surprised me. Well, thank you for having me here today and for focusing on, community opportunity to purchase programs and the San Jose proposal. I think several folks in the audience probably have heard our spiel before about what the proposal consists of. So I'm going to try to focus on, kind of what are the goals behind the program, And what do we see as the advantages of the program, and just a couple more details, and then happy to answer more questions later. And I want to say we couldn't have done this work without Asen being a fellow with the city for 2 years. Unfortunately, that time is over, but I'm glad that he's here today because he really is the main knowledge keeper about other programs and kind of the details of those. And, you know, whenever we do something, hopefully kind of on the more innovative timeline, earlier side, we always try to learn from other communities and see what they're doing and see how it's working. And so that work doesn't stop. So thanks for Asen for being here today. So as we approached this work of the community opportunity to purchase, and as Asen said, as we refined dozens and dozens of different ideas about what we think we could put in place to help stem and mitigate the effects of displacement of people living in our community. We were really approaching this work, and we prioritize this as part of our citywide anti-displacement strategy that was passed about almost a year and a half ago. And we purposefully did that because we thought that from what we had learned from other communities and all the things that our objectives that we wanted to meet, we thought COPA could be a nice complement and an important tool as San Jose starts to build out its preservation offerings. We have traditionally been really good on affordable housing production programs, but we really are in the beginning stages of making strides on preservation programs. So as we think about COPA, that's the context. This is one of the first preservation programs that we will have put forward. So these goals we approach this work on how to prevent displacement. And again, our frame is, who should we be fighting the most for? It's really folks who have very few resources and are kind of at the edge of not being able to stay here. Even before COVID, we knew that our area is one of the most high displacement risk cities actually in the country. And it's a little hard to get data since COVID, although we are trying to do that. It's just really gotten worse for so many people since then. So we approached this work after going through more than a year and a half of deep community listening together with SOMOS Mayfair, our partners, working partnership, and others. So we're thinking about the residents first and foremost, and then thinking about the other impacts on the community as well. So preventing displacement, and then promoting more restricted affordable housing in our market that is owned by experienced and competent nonprofit developers, people who are not profit motivated and would not have the incentive to, when they sell for a really large amount of money, which really only supports raised rents over time. And, you know, we're trying to figure out how do we maximize the number of partners that the city can work with over time to ensure that properties stay reasonably priced and well maintained in perpetuity. In doing this work, also what we liked about doing a COPA program, in addition to offering preservation funds, which is necessary for this to work really in the background, we thought that what we learned about the COPA efforts around the country is that they strongly emphasize trying to reach out to tenants and educate them and make them kind of part of the change process. And in this way, we hope that COPA could be a building block so that we could have more kind of uniformly educated tenants about how do their properties work, what are the protections that they have, what are the landlord's expectations, and just kind of be more knowledgeable in this area and able to potentially meet a purchaser of their own building. I know when I lived in a 4-unit rent stabilized building for 7 years, and I just loved that place. It was in San Francisco when I moved to the area. And, it was very difficult to be a tenant in a turbulent kind of market because the property changed hands 4 times in 7 years. And, the stress that causes for residents, even someone like me who had a good job and had some savings in the bank, is just extraordinary. And we know how many residents are suffering in our community, not just from paying too much for rent, but being doubled and tripled up. And so this is how we were thinking about this. How can we benefit tenants, make them more knowledgeable, reduce their stress, increase their touch with potential purchasers, understand how it might be different than the leases or the rules that they're living under now. And then really think about how could we use the program and then funding opportunities to go parallel with it to help promote pathways to saving for homeownership, or creating more affordable homeownership options, or even some asset building programs that let people save, and then it might even look like what their upside could be if they actually own their unit, even if they didn't technically own their unit, but they still experience the stability and the asset growth. So we think COPA could be a complement and an opportunity to put some other things in place as well. Next slide. So just to review, this is, we're looking at COPA again. It is just a change in process in which there would be opportunity for qualified nonprofit organizations that the city pre-qualifies, that they could make the first offer on buildings covered under the ordinance to buy the property. And then if the owner, who has full control over who to sell to and the price to sell at, if the owner says, thanks for the offer, I'd rather open this up to the whole market and see what I can get for the property, this proposal would just have the last opportunity to make another offer if a nonprofit offered upfront. So, the city wouldn't be in the middle of any transactions, and we would be structuring the program so that any nonprofits that did make offers would need to follow the rules of the program. A key tenet is that current residents at any income level would not be displaced during this and during the sale. And so we think the program and the city's subsidy could help to right-size rents for many people. The vast majority of low-income renters in our market, I think it's about 3/4, pay more than 30% of their income in rent, and about half of those folks also pay more than 50% of their income in rent. So we're trying to right-size rents down to a 30% standard for most folks who would be covered in these buildings. And then we think this could also increase the number of purchasers in San Jose, making fair market value offers out there on properties. So we think it could build a pipeline. And finally, the folks who we'd be working with, they may be based in San Jose, the qualified nonprofits, or the property managers. They may not be, but they're going to be folks that the city's familiar with and we know how to get in touch with. So local home ownership and, from the Bay Area kinds of companies and property management is also a side benefit. Next slide. Just a note, as we think about who we're trying to help, the city's trying to take a more intentional look at, when we put in place the program, who is it that we're helping? This is a lot to absorb quickly, but this is just what are the race and ethnicities of people who are living in different size places that are being rented. And with our COPA proposal, you can see there are a lot of renters in single family homes, single family detached townhomes, and condos. Our proposal is not to cover single family homes because that market is so fast, even though so many renters live in those homes. So that was a kind of a reasonable negotiated decision after a lot of input on this topic. But when you add up the other rows of units 2 and more, which is the proposed coverage cohort for the program, that bottom line shows that what's the percentage of renters in each race and ethnicity category that could be covered by this. So we can see that renters are not just any people. There are certain kinds of folks, right? And so we want to be intentional about that, about thinking with that frame. Next slide. Quick summary of the proposal, which is really just to set out a path and a defined timeline. And we bifurcated the proposal into buildings that are really small, 2 to 4 units, and then those that are 5 or more units. And then, we could talk some more about this, but San Francisco's program, we patterned it pretty closely after San Francisco. Washington, D.C. has a range of timelines depending on if it's a tenant making an offer to purchase, tenant organization or not. But you can see that our proposal is very similar to the other proposals. Where there are differences, it is, for certain reasons we could get into. And next slide. Finally, this is just a quick list. There are lots of reasons why we think this is a good program. We think preservation is important, and existing lower cost apartment buildings not always easy to own and operate. And we know that. We think that city support for keeping those properties in good shape is important. The city ongoing oversight and perpetual affordability is key. And again, no renters would be displaced, even if they were higher incomes. The only exception to that being if folks were overcrowded with several households in one unit, we'd try to find other alternatives for them to live in affordable housing somewhere if they had to come down in size. But right-sized rents and is the other benefit, and really what we're proposing would be a relatively small change to the sales process for these benefits, with many different carve-outs, including owner-occupied 1 to 4 unit buildings, as well as family inheritances and bankruptcies and foreclosures. But again, we're carving out single-family homes, condos, and townhomes. That's not part of our proposal. Just one tool in the toolbox to help avoid and mitigate displacement. And as I said, we'd have to get more folks who want to do this work, nonprofit developers and city subsidy behind this. All in all, we think this is a really reasonable proposal to balance lots of different interests in our community and help stabilize and keep the people who are longtime San Jose residents here. We don't want San Jose to completely change over and drive people out just because it's a hot market. So this is one tool to help that in a small way. Thanks, Regina.
Thank you so much, Kristen. And I appreciate you sort of giving folks a glimpse of what the city is considering and talking about in a very detailed way. I think that's very helpful for the discussion coming. But also, I'm just so grateful to hear that this is just one tool as a part of a overall, vision for preservation in this community. So I appreciate you for that. So we're going to move to our third presenter, Andrea Portillo. Andrea was born and raised in the east side of San Jose. So as the daughter of 2 Mexican immigrant parents, she grew up with a clear understanding of the support and resources her family and predominantly migrant community needed, but often lacked. She is working with SOMOS Mayfair as their community organizing and policy manager. And her previous nonprofit experience working directly with immigrant families and youth has fueled her passion for exploring equity-based policies, programs, and services that bridge the gaps between legislation and the realities of migrant communities like her own. So with that, I'm going to welcome Andrea. I can't wait to hear a little bit more from her and the work that she's doing with SOMOS Mayfair and the community on the east side.
Thank you, Regina. Hi, everybody. Again, Andrea Portillo with SOMOS Mayfair. Really excited to just share a little bit more about how SOMOS has been engaging with this policy and share a little bit more about all of the work that we've done with community, with support of other partners to make sure that folks are engaged throughout this process. If we could go to the next slide. So really quickly, and I wanted to show a lot of photos of all of the work that we're doing just to really center community in the process. So SOMOS Mayfair really strives to build community power in East San Jose through leadership development and by organizing around resident-led solutions. Our Vecinos Activos team, which is our organizing team that organizes around issues of housing, organizes families in the neighborhood throughout East Side and now in the wider and greater city boundaries through direct action and policy change. Families are really organizing to advocate for permanent affordability, neighborhood development without displacement, preservation, and other housing solutions. Before I share a little bit more about how we've engaged the community around this policy, as well as share a few priorities that we identified with community, I wanted to uplift the story of one of our Vecinos Activos leaders, Norma Chavez. Her story is really powerful and not only highlights the realities of families across the city of San Jose, but also speaks to why this policy is so important for a community as an anti-displacement strategy and as a preservation tool. I don't think we have audio. When you share your screen, there's a little button at the bottom that says also share audio. So maybe if you take it down and then share it up again and click that little box, I think that should work.
Mi nombre es Norma Chávez. He vivido en el este de San José por más de 14 años. En este tiempo he sido desplazada 2 veces y sigo con la angustia de no tener una vivienda segura. Coppa puede cambiar mi vida grandemente porque sería una luz para poder alcanzar mi sueño de tener una vivienda digna y segura. Coppa es importante para mí y mi comunidad porque todos tendríamos las mismas oportunidades y beneficios que nos brinda al tener un hogar seguro, sin tener que preocuparnos el día de mañana buscando un hogar nuevo para mi familia y no tendríamos la necesidad de dejar mi comunidad y mis amigos. Y mis hijos no sufrirían una vez más el desplazamiento, ya que ellos han sido los más afectados. Al vivir en una época en el año 2014, les tocó una mala experiencia al perder nuestra vivienda y terminar viviendo en un cuarto. La convivencia era muy poca porque no podíamos salir del cuarto, solo salíamos a hacer lo más necesario. Por ejemplo, ir al baño o de vez en cuando cocinar y comer encerrados en ese pequeño cuarto. La única manera de distraerlos era salir todo el día a la calle para hacerles el día alegre y poder disfrutarlos y distraerlos de la realidad. Es urgente que la ley COPA sea establecida en San José para que las familias y la comunidad ya no sufran más. Tener acceso a una vivienda y digna es un derecho humano. El momento es hoy y ahora.
Thank you. So we hear stories like Norma's every single day in the community and through the work that we do. And many of us share these same experiences. And so this is why we are so strongly advocating for solutions like COPA and why community is so strongly advocating for urgency and for different solutions to address the issues and displacement that they're facing. Our Vecinos Activos team has been supporting the community engagement and education piece of this work because, again, we truly believe in and value community-centered and driven solutions. We, with the support of several partners, including SV at Home, Working Partnerships, Viet Unity, South Bay CLT, hosted several community COPA forums this past summer to not only support community in understanding the policy, but also to gather their input on key aspects of the policy. Through citywide outreach and community engagement, again, we hosted 6 forums, including 2 in Vietnamese. Over 350 community members attended our forums. And again, we asked community very specific questions around the policy, including what income levels we should prioritize, the importance of tenant engagement and ownership opportunities. We learned a lot about what excited people about this policy, what concerns them about the policy, but also what was missing from policies that we explored. We took all of this input and we gathered and created a community COPA framework to ensure that the needs, again, of our most impacted communities were reflected in this policy. So I want to just touch briefly on 2 main things, 2 main takeaways that came out of all of the education and input that we collected from community as we were beginning to draft our community framework around this policy. Obviously, I can't stress it enough, but the need for urgency and for solutions now. We have been a part of, in a lot of different spaces, advocating for anti-displacement strategies. Asen and Kristen spoke a little bit earlier about the role that community has played in supporting these resident-led solutions. And we can't wait any longer. We hear it from community every day. We see it from community every day, just that sense of urgency to really put forth solutions to address the issues that we're seeing. Folks also really voiced the importance and the need for autonomy, voice, and decision-making power over their housing solutions. This means, obviously, that the policy should prioritize tenant organizing, education, technical assistance, and support throughout the process. Families, deserve, and again, we value the need and see the need for families to be engaged and informed and consulted throughout this process as a way to shift the relationships that I think we often hear about and see between tenants and landlords. And so really advocating for autonomy and decision-making power for community around their housing situation. And then finally, we also heard the importance of this policy, including pathways to ownership. Ownership as a means of stability and security. I know a lot of times, and we know the importance of home ownership in terms of building equity, generational wealth, but really what we heard from community was the need for pathways to ownership to create stability and security. Also by ensuring that these properties remain permanently affordable, that means it opens up a lot of opportunities for community, right? That means maybe families no longer have to work multiple jobs to afford to pay the rent and can now spend more time with their families at home, supporting their children with school, maybe starting a college savings account. So really thinking about the importance of pathways to ownership as a way to bring security and stability to communities and ensure that folks are not being displaced or bought out and pushed out of their communities that they lived in for generations, right? Or for many, many years to come. And so how do we use this policy as a tool, as a step in the right direction to begin to offer these opportunities and address the needs of our most impacted folks? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrea. So I appreciate the story that, in particular, that young brave woman, Norma, shared with such authenticity. And I know we all have stories like that, or we know folks who have stories like that. But we also, all have, a certain amount of privilege to be in this community and to benefit from some of the change that we see. So my first question to you all as a panel is this. We've seen, we've heard how important it is to prevent displacement. And we see the impact that it can have on low-income families. But if you could talk a little bit about how gentrification and high rates of displacement like what Kristen mentioned, we're seeing in San Jose, how those high rates of displacement impact the greater community like San Jose and impact its economy. I think that would be a great way for folks to just understand why we're so invested in an anti-displacement strategy. So who would like to go first?
I can get us started.
Thank you.
So, I mean, the way I always describe it is essentially like cities essentially need balance, right? You need people to have people who are in different education patterns, different racial groups and ethnic backgrounds, have different types of jobs. You don't want to kind of live in a city that's all the same, right? All homogenous. And so what that means is in order to be able to have that kind of diversity of income, that diversity of background, and that diversity of any economic diversity in your city, what you really need is a housing market and a housing system that really supports multiple pathways for folks to achieve home stability. And I say home stability, and I think Andrea really put it very well, because what we generally mean is you want housing that is safe, that is stable, and that is affordable, and that allows you to be allows for a platform to be built on top of it. And what that platform looks like is, of course, schools, jobs, career, and of course, free time. The piece about schools is really important for folks who have been really watching what's been happening to some of our local school districts. We've had multiple schools close over the years. We have seen, I think at one point I looked at the data and I saw 4,400 students. So 4,400 children essentially disappeared from schools in San Jose. That's all schools, by the way. So obviously we're seeing schools close down. The other thing that we're seeing is that there's a huge labor shortage. I'm sure folks have seen that, you know, their favorite restaurant has closed. Some of the stores that they really like going to have closed because some of the folks who used to work in those kinds of businesses are no longer able to afford to live here. And it's just not worth it to drive from Tracy for $17 an hour. So obviously they end up making different choices. The other thing that I think is really important, and this is something that for folks who have been able to travel around a little bit, is there is something about being able to grow up in one place. I personally, you know, everybody knows, I think, well, people who know me know, I've lived a lot of different places. I've moved around a lot. And I definitely always think about what kind of a life can be built when you're able to sort of grow up in the same community, that you have access to the same schools, the same religious institutions, the same community. You can have tontons, abuelas, you know, mimas around that could be there to actually help you. And so I think that's part of the thought behind anti-displacement policy. You want to be able to give people the power and the platform they need to be able to thrive in their community.
That's great. Anyone else want to touch on that?
Really quickly, if I could, I think Asen touched on it perfectly, is really just the breadth of impact that displacement has on a family and on a community. Speaking specifically around education, because we also work really closely with our local school district. And we've heard from them for years just the impact that lower rates of enrollment have had for the school. But also we hear from community too, just the impact that displacement has on children. And the lack of, you know, moving schools and the impact that has for children. There's, you know, greater risks of educational delay. There's so many different impacts that displacement has. And so I also think another big piece that we really hear from a lot is the mental health impacts of displacement, and what does it mean to leave your community where you've lived for many years and have social connections and ties and mutual support networks, and having to leave that it takes a really big toll on a family and on that community as well. I think it's both ways, right? We're losing a lot of culture and life of communities that have been so connected for so long.
Yeah, thank you. Kristen, I wanted to,
Oh, I'm sorry,
oh,
please.
I was gonna,
Add a really quick note, which
sure.
is we're working on small business displacement as a city. This is just about residential displacement, but everyone across the country realizes the cultural resources that give places some there. This is really important to be intentional about for the city. Just keeping residents here is like the least we can do, and then we build on that. I wanted to just also say, one other thing, our housing stock does not meet the needs of our residents. And I did look up the data, 48%, this is a 5-year average before COVID, 48% of all renter households were either cost burdened or severely cost burdened. But when you look at low income, 3/4, 76% were paying too much, which leads to the doubling and tripling up. And I'll just say one other thing, we're about to report out on our RENA goals through our housing element annual report. And, to the extent that's a real goal based on growth expectations and, demand and our access to transit and our ability to develop densely, we're only 24% all of the way to our affordable housing goal, and we're 90% of the way through our cycle. There's a desperate need for more affordable housing here and stabilization of people who are here. We don't have a great housing stock and needs fit right now. We really have to work on this.
That was great. Thank you so much. We have a little bit less than 10 minutes left, so I'm going to take a few of the questions that we've been getting from the audience. One question is specific to that program, that COPA program that's been implemented in San Francisco. What's the tenant component of the San Francisco program look like? So if someone could speak to that and the community involvement, how it really, COPA here in San Jose could benefit low and moderate wage workers who are getting displaced. Just if you could talk a little bit just about the community engagement once you have COPA and compare it to what's happening in San Francisco, that would be great.
Yeah, I can sort of take the first stab at it. So the program in San Francisco is a community opportunity to purchase. So that does mean that the opportunity to purchase actually goes to a group of community-based nonprofits. And the ones in San Francisco, they have 8 qualified nonprofits in that city, are very neighborhood-based. So just some names, there's like the Tenderloin Neighborhood Development Corporation, Bernal Heights Community Development Corporation, the Mission Economic Development Agency, and so they're very neighborhood-based. A lot of these organizations actually started as community-based nonprofits that did organizing in the past or that did tenant eviction support. And so they have really, really deep ties in those communities. And it's actually one of the requirements for them to become qualified nonprofits in that city. The other thing is that the COPA program encourages really deep tenant engagement with residents. And from what I've heard, the qualified nonprofits also try and request really have the participation of the property owner as well. However, there isn't an actual requirement for tenant engagement as part of the COPA program in San Francisco, but no deal goes through without there being tenant support in there. I think for the COPA program in San Jose, our goal is to try to, first of all, create some requirements of what that tenant engagement will look like for the qualified nonprofits. But also at the same time, we're also really, really focused on this idea of creating this option to transfer to tenant ownership in the future. And so we really see the qualified nonprofit as coming in and really, first of all, creating stabilization for the property by just simply taking it off the speculative market. And then the second part is really creating the foundation for there to be a transfer towards ownership in the future. Or if the residents decide that they just want to stay at the current affordable rental rates, then that's the choice that they can go ahead and make. But at least that they have the option and they have the resources to be able to make that choice.
That's great. So if no one else is going to add to that, there is a follow-up question in terms of sort of the market, how the COPA program and sort of interfaces with the market dynamics in terms of having to close within a certain amount of time frame, let's say 90 days. In San Francisco, do they have a 90-day close period? How does San Jose's proposed timing compare to the San Francisco program?
I can get this one too.
Right,
So basically,
go ahead, yeah.
yeah, so basically the one in San Francisco is, I think it's the quickest. And it has a 5-day notice period, 25-day offer period, and a 60-day close period. So it's 90 days from beginning to end as a maximum. And we always said this during our presentations, which is those are just limits. Doesn't mean you have to take every single day within those timelines. The one in San Jose varies by size. So for properties that are 2 to 4 units, the overall process is 100 days. That includes a 60-day closing period. And for properties that are 5 and above, it could go up to 140 days, but that would include a 90-day closing period because there would need to be a little bit more time to be able to secure all of the financing, layer whatever capital stack the qualified nonprofit needs in order to be able to close on the property.
Yeah, I had a slide on this and comparing the San Francisco and the DC timelines. You know, the DC timelines, because they do try to accommodate longer timeframes for tenant organizations to make purchase offers. That's why their numbers of days get really long. But for San Francisco, it is more like what we are proposing, which is folks who already do development who are nonprofits. Would be making the offers. And our upfront timeline is just a little bit longer than San Francisco's. Otherwise, we patterned it really closely because, as Asen said, you know, San Francisco has place-based nonprofits. And so, you know, if a building goes up for sale in Bernal Heights, we know it's going to be Bernal Heights Neighborhood Development Corp that's going to make the offer. San Jose doesn't have this network of community-based nonprofits that are community development corporations. And that's something that we'd like to grow that network. We're working on that separately with some nonprofit operating support and capacity building support plans. But our idea is that the nonprofits would have to talk to each other and make sure only one was making an offer on the building, because we don't want them to bid each other up on a given property either, or like, we just want it to be a smooth process with one offer that the owner can consider. And that takes a little bit of time for folks to coordinate up front. So
based on that, we're running out of time. I have one more quick question, and it's about the public outreach. You know, how will property owners be sort of educated on this program once it goes into effect? I know there's been a lot of community outreach. If someone could just quickly touch on that and the intention to really educate folks once there's something in place.
Yeah, if I could quickly say what we have done, we did this 7-month design process with 167 different people weighing in on one of the 2 teams that we had going. We had, 14 facilitated meetings, over 500 people regularly invited to these meetings. And so, and then we've gone to the phase 2 outreach. We did 7 public meetings, another almost 200 more people kind of filing into those meetings and getting educated. Our proposal, though, is as we bring it forward would be, we would take basically the following year to qualify nonprofits, to write some program regulations. And we've actually applied for and just announced that we got awarded another Partnership for the Bay's Future 2-year fellow. And together with SOMOS Mayfair, our community partner, we would have that fellow focus on, helping build out the program and doing extensive community outreach for the year after council were to approve the ordinance. So we know that we really want to focus on getting the outcomes of the program that we want. And that's really only going to happen if everybody knows what the pretty simple rules would be to follow and follows them. We don't want to get into the business of like heavily regulating or levying lots of fines because we're trying to catch people after the fact that didn't follow the process, right? We want everyone to know what the process is, and we're planning to spend a lot of people power to have that happen together with SOMOS Mayfair. If council passes this, you know, for the following 12 months.
Well, this has
A lot
been
of
great.
outreach.
Yes, this has been great. I recognize that this topic just really needed more time. There's so much happening, and we appreciate all of your hard work on this. I'm going to turn it over to Emily, who's going to wrap us up. Thank you all.
Thank you. Let me switch. So I'm here for the call to action. Thank you all for joining us. We will be sending up a follow-up email with the slides and any unanswered questions. And one of the call to actions we have is we're asking everyone to join sign the petition brought forth by the COPA Coalition led by SOMOS Mayfair. I put the link in the chat. Please read through and sign it, and we hope to get your support